Prologue. In order to do the right thing, sometimes we have to sacrifice a few things. Even our dreams. The difference between good and evil. The difference was that good was a pure, heroic nature, like natural nature, well-hearted and peaceful respect for others. However, evil was dead, dreadful, disrespect, unusual, not nature but nurture, well, hatred for others. Chapter 1, Opening Night. In the dark gloomy street on a bouncy hill next to a bus station. There in the cold misty night a man stands patiently. He's a detective, a good detective that knows about murder. And the causes for that murder. He's on a mission to solve a crime that has been committed for a long time. The criminal that had committed the crime has escaped. The detective's name was Dave Monteith. He lived at number 26 on Kettle Street. He used to live in Scotland, Edinburgh, where he stayed until he was 26, in which he left his ordinary life behind, including his mother Maria Monteith, his father Matthew Monteith and his brother Terry Monteith. Around this time Dave decided to get himself a job as a detective, but in order for him to achieve that he had to leave. The house that he lived in had a round handle and a bell on the side that created an unpleasant sound, which was of course deafening to the ear. But it also had a golden touch added to it to give the object some life. Once inside, there was a large table filled with lots of peppers, with 1 cup of whiskey sitting on a brown wooden desk, along with newspapers that had the same article about murders, which were being committed by the same criminal. Once upstairs there was a large bed made for 2, although only 1 person was living there. Next to it there was a phone. The year is 2007 in England. The detective arrived at a building that he works at called Murder, Killing and Robbing, written as a banner for the building. Once inside the building, there stood a green like grass table with a cup filled with tea and sugar sitting on the side. Next to the table there stood a wooden door with large windows that were see-through glass and curtains that creeped up on the sides. The next office up had a yellow door with even bigger windows, and in front of the red-orangey desk there stood a pretty secretary whose work was divided between papers and coffee mugs. To the side, she had worked there for 14 years as a secretary, but now works as a detective for profit and helping problems with sad and lonely people. The next office on the right had a huge door with large windows that looked a bit like green leaves sitting on top of a mountain of trees. Once inside the office, there stood a half-filled cup of leaf tea, and a coffee table with yellow books sitting on top of the desk next to the library, which had lots and lots of amazing books, but most of them had killings inside, such as an image of Jack the Ripper, whose life ended in a rather weird way. The image shows Jack killing a woman who has cheated her husband. He kills her with a butcher's knife. The other books have images of Jack murdering 6 women who have been paid to steal decks from other people. The cup that had half-filled tea inside that went all dry, like some dog spit all over it. The yellow books had weird and strange images of dragons and knights, like some fairy tale. The yellow books were about 226 pages long, which included Little Riding Hood, Robin Hood, and many more. The entire room was left like someone's toy room, but it wasn't a toy room, it was Mr. Wilson's office. Mr. Wilson's office was big and huge because of the way the door was shaped like a large ducktail. Mr. Wilson told the young new detective to bring in the detective named Dave Monteith, and that there's a mission for him. "Ah, Detective Monteith, sir." Dave stood patiently as if it was a big announcement. Mr. Wilson turned his view to Dave. "There's a mission for you," Wilson in a calm yet selected manner faced the detective with decision eyes. "What is it? What kind of mission?" Dave said with a loud yet smooth voice. Mr. Wilson staged right in front of Dave with a stare like some vampire waiting for some human blood to drain from. Dave turned away from the view of his unnatural boss. Mr. Wilson went on to keep drinking whiskey and leaf tea, which was very inclusive for someone with whiskey and tea as a drink. As Dave turns away for a little second, a white figure appears with yellow eyes, red teeth, and orange hair, staring right at Dave. As soon as Mr. Wilson entered out of his office, the white figure was gone. At that point, Dave was very surprised now that a figure appeared and stared at him, making Dave think, who could that white figure have been? The detective knew something wasn't right. And he would find out who the figure was, and when he does he'll arrest him or she, sooner than later. but for now it was time to keep things at closed doors for now. Until Dave finds who that white figure was, and he'll know eventually, who that white figure could possibly be. The following morning there was a report of a missing boy. The missing boy was on a poster that said, "Missing Child," written on the front of the page with an image of the boy. But there were parents of the missing child whose names were George and Marina Villager, and they lived at number 31 on Willow Street. George and Marina Villager were worried about their child being missing. I felt like that when my brother was missing just at 13 and never came back. My mother couldn't cope with my brother's disappearance. My father never even talked to me because I used to make him angry, but I knew my father never liked me and instead preferred my brother Terry. It's been 23 years since my brother Terry went missing. I still miss him and worry about where he went and if he was kidnapped. It's a mystery that I'll have to solve myself, but I need to focus on finding this missing child and getting him back home to his family. The following afternoon, I got out of my car, which had white headlights which flickered all the time at night, and the top of the car had a little lamp like a police car. But that afternoon, I arrived at killing, robbing and murder bulleting at 2:50 in the morning, which was pretty dark, but that's how life is. It helps you with so many things, but you can't remember all about it, because it's so reasonable, that it starts to hurt your eyes and skin and makes you shake and shiver, like a cartoon episode of Scooby-Doo. I entered and got a rather weird phone call of a murder being committed by a psychopath. I knew I had to run all the way to the crime scene. It was cold and misty, like a cemetery filled with graves and with open coffins of dead corpses, which were of course dead people. The crime scene itself was like a horror film where only the killer survived. Once I got there, a white figure appeared just like before. It was the same one from 2 days ago. My head was spinning like a record around the scene where the body was found, but I felt this strange feeling of seeing outcomes of creatures and people, but I had no clue what it was, but it was unusual. Later that night the rest of the team transferred the girl to the forensics. 4 hours later we got the results. It explained that she was killed by bite marks on her legs, arms and neck, but this sort of thing only happens in horror films unless this is real, and this poor innocent girl was destroyed by a deadly demon. Maybe she was killed by a vampire. Of course the team mocked me for my rash and yet non-logical theories of the girl's untimely death. I exited the room in a fit of rage, as if something had taken over and made me lose my control of myself. Once outside I felt the strange sensation again, but this time I saw an outcome of the future which detailed 2 other people that I hadn't met yet but was about to. Then I felt sane again and I took a midnight stroll, until I noticed the figure. I started to walk forwards to him. I stared deep into his demon eyes and I asked a simple question: "Did you kill that girl?" But he didn't answer, as if he couldn't speak. Then in a fit of rage the creature lunged at me. I knew I had to defend myself or it was going to kill me. The only rational thing I could come up with was to kill it, so I shot it in its demon eyes. The next morning I heard a strange noise surrounding my house, then out of nowhere these cloaked figures approached me with dread. They whispered, "You are a threat to us." I responded with, "Oh, I am, and you lot are going to jail." But they disappeared in a flash of ashy smoke. It was at this point I started to contemplate that I was losing my mind. Then I took a list of things that I saw. First, there was a girl with red hair. Second, there was a boy with yellow hair. Third, there was a dangerous place filled with fire. Fourth, there were creatures that were similar to the one I fought yesterday. I knew that this list meant something, but I didn't know yet. So I started to search locations of murders and I took and wrote down the addresses to these locations. Before I left the house I phoned my boss, Mr. Wilson. "Ah, Mr. Wilson, I was calling to say I think I know what's happening and these innocent people are being killed." Mr. Wilson placed his reddish phone down and walked away. I realized that he wasn't going to take my theories seriously, so I decided that I was going to solve this mystery myself. I left the house, and soon an old man approached me. He explained that I was chosen and destined with great power to vanquish great evil. He also said with the power of 3, can defeat evil with its 3. I didn't know what he meant, but I was going to find out. My whole world felt like it was dead and in its place was a dark and grim one, but I started to understand that sometimes this world is evil. The following afternoon I started to write a notebook to keep track of my encounters. This was only the beginning, things were about to get a lot stranger. But this was going to be a new world, but I was ready for it. If evil is destined to be defeated by 3, then time better give me enough chances. Later that morning the milkman arrives, but he was different, and I mean different. For example, his hair and his eyes changed, then his whole body transformed into a wolf. Things were strange. He then disappeared out of nowhere like the creature before. I knew monsters now existed, but the only thing that was on my mind in this current time was how I was going to make people believe that what I was seeing was real. Then I suggested that maybe it would be best for everyone that they didn't know. I had another outcome in my head. This time it was a future event. This event was a happy one with people having a good time. The future seemed bright, but I knew in order for it to happen, certain things must occur in order for these outcomes to come true. Monsters were real. I knew I needed a team, but not an ordinary one. The team must be 3 people including myself. But I had my mind on to tell me that. Later that night I dreamt of all the possible outcomes of seeing deadly creatures like werewolves, and yet nothing changed. My thoughts were not human, as though they became something entirely different, like some monster of my own self. I started to question my own sanity, like was I a horrible demon from which hell itself spawned onto this somewhat holy earth? I thought to myself and answered one simple question: no, I can't be like them, I'm human, aren't I? Although my simple yet logical conclusion felt not enough to make me feel human, today I had become something different. I became a Hyde, the Hyde of which one had seen, including myself. Moved through my nicely made and decorated house and stared deeply into a nearby mirror. It was my reflection, but something felt wrong. It didn't show my natural self, it showed me what I have become, a monster. I knew that I had to figure this dilemma out for myself. About 4 hours after my discovery, I left the house. I thought today that I'd buy some food. Around 6 p.m., I entered the supermarket. Human people glazed at me. What were they thinking? It then became clear, they knew I was different. 20 minutes later they surrounded me. With just one thought they silently moved their human bodies further towards my own. They deeply started the sense of a holy chant: you are not holy, you must be claimed. I had no idea what they were talking about, but I could ask any question and they wouldn't answer. I paid for my food and departed. That was strange. It seems that everyone knew something that I didn't. And just like that, another outcome created itself within my non-human Hyde mind. This was a sign of a chance, but I had no chance of reaching it. That late afternoon people had become afraid of me, like I was some form of freak from the undead. But my thoughts kept me somewhat in the right mind. That night I started to question my sanity again. Was I losing my mind, or was I afraid of the truth? That truth of my existence being changed into something different. Was I a monster? This was when I doubted myself, specifically my mind.